Nos metemos en Yanquilandia y esta ola de protestas en Estados Unidos contra las políticas de Trump.
Tema hands off o no tocar, manos fuera de nuestro gobierno, ciudadanos se reunieron en el monumento.
Aparte todos están en contra de los achiques del Estado que están haciendo en Yanquilandia, ¿eh? Mirá que yo entiendo acá en Argentina que la gente, con la historia que tenemos acá y con las necesidades que hay, que si empiezan a echar gente, digamos, se pudra. Pero en Estados Unidos, con lo elefantiásico que es el Estado y realmente está lleno de, no sé si de ñoquis, viste, como acá, pero sí de gente que no sirve para nada y que están al pedo, porque sí en Estados Unidos hay como mucha más federalismo, ¿no? Los estados tienen como mucho más libertad y muchas más responsabilidades. Entonces hay muchas cosas que gasta el Estado federal que son al pedo. Ya el Estado federal se agrandó tanto en pelotudeces que ya ni siquiera los organismos más importantes como era FEMA o era lo que era, bueno, ahora me olvidé el otro nombre, pero eran organismos que actuaban en catástrofes y demás y se hacían cargo, ¿no?, de la situación. Ya ni siquiera esos tienen el prestigio que tienen hoy en día.
A George Washington.
Pero bueno, es raro que estén protestando por eso, ¿no?
En la capital estadounidense para manifestar.
Cuando aparte de Estados Unidos históricamente fue medio antiestado federal.
Su rechazo a las iniciativas del presidente Donald Trump durante estos primeros 75 días que lleva en el poder. Hablamos con algunos de ellos.
Él tiene que detenerse y la gente que puede detenerlo son nuestros legisladores y viven y trabajan allí. Y estamos aquí para decirles que tienen que hacer su trabajo y nos vamos a enojar más y más hasta que lo hagan. Tienen que hacerle un impeachment y esta vez tienen que condenarlo y deshacerse de él.
Son distintas las causas que convocan a los ciudadanos en el monumento a George Washington en la capital estadounidense, desde defender el derecho a la migración hasta los derechos reproductivos de las mujeres, pasando por los derechos de la comunidad LGBTI, pero
ves que es como que todavía la protesta no se entiende bien por qué es, ¿no? Es por los derechos de las mujeres, por los derechos de los LGTB, porque están echando gente del Estado. No, te das cuenta que son gente que está en contra de Trump, pero por múltiples razones, que todavía ni siquiera tiene que ver la economía, no por la inmigración, cualquier cosa que no le afecta a la vida real a estas personas, ¿no?
También defendiendo la causa palestina y en contra del presidente ruso Vladimir Putin. Las manifestaciones se reprodujeron en los 50 estados de Estados Unidos y también le demandan acciones al Congreso en contra de las órdenes ejecutivas del presidente Donald Trump.
Y también tenemos, aparte de estas protestas de todo este arco opositor, también tenemos la caída de Wall Street por todo lo que tiene que ver con aranceles.
La bolsa de valores volvió a desplomarse. La caída cierra la peor semana desde la pandemia. Los aranceles de Trump provocaron miles de millones de dólares en pérdidas en las cuentas de jubilación de los estadounidenses y en las ganancias de las empresas.
Me da un poco de miedo, sí, la verdad es que sí.
¿Por qué?
Porque es un cambio tan radical, tan como violento.
China anunció que en respuesta a los aranceles impuestos por Trump, ellos también impondrán un arancel de 34% a todos los productos que importen de Estados Unidos. Demócratas criticaron a Trump por jugar golf en Mar-a-Lago mientras la bolsa se iba en picada.
Terminó en la cárcel Secot, en El Salvador, por un error administrativo. Una jueza federal determinó que Kilmar Ábrego García tendrá que ser regresado a los Estados Unidos.
Al más tardar 11:59 de la noche el día lunes.
La jueza federal argumentó que esto fue un acto ilegal. El abogado del Departamento de Justicia dijo no conocer la respuesta a dos preguntas de la jueza. ¿Sobre qué base legal está Kilmar Ábrego García en El Salvador? ¿Y por qué el gobierno no podría lograr su regreso a los Estados Unidos? Ábrego fue enviado a El Salvador a pesar de una orden de protección otorgada en el 2019 que debería haberlo evitado. Fue detenido frente a su hijo de 5 años y la última llamada la hizo a su esposa.
Después de su tratamiento de diálisis el día de hoy, José Alfredo Pacheco González se reencontró con su hermano José Gregorio, quien fue liberado hoy de un centro de detención de ICE.
Por favor, den la privacidad a los hermanos.
No, y están haciendo todo, digamos, una narrativa con las deportaciones de Trump y no van buscando casos en donde hicieron las cosas mal, ¿no? Deportaron a alguien que no tenían que deportar y demás.
Se acaban de reunir.
se fundieron en un fuerte y emotivo abrazo. Hubo lágrimas, besos y palabras de agradecimiento después de un mes de no verse.
Muy feliz, estoy muy feliz con mi hermano. Gracias por todo lo que han hecho por mi hermano y por mí. Se lo agradecemos.
El reencuentro de estos dos hermanos inmigrantes venezolanos.
No, pobre aparte, ¿no? Porque dice, la gente dice, no, gracias por todo lo que han hecho, ¿no? Tenía que volver hermano para que le done un riñón. Y los políticos y los medios los están usando solamente para pegarle a Trump, como en otro momento los usará otro para pegarle a Biden, ¿no? Si los medios no estuvieran comprados por Biden. Y en el medio está la gente, ¿no? De todas estas peleas mediáticas.
Se produjo luego de que José Gregorio fue detenido por agentes federales el pasado 3 de marzo en Cícero, Illinois, porque tenía una orden de deportación en su contra. Con José Gregorio en libertad, se podrá continuar con los exámenes médicos para el trasplante de riñón que requiere José Alfredo.
No,
la frontera de El Paso, Texas, cambió.
Es esto, ¿no? Lo que está pasando, aquejando a Estados Unidos, ¿no? La caída en la bolsa, temas, ¿no? De esto de inmigrantes y de temas fronterizos.
Radicalmente desde la llegada de Donald Trump a la presidencia. Antes, por aquí cruzaban de manera ilegal cientos de migrantes. Ahora, rara vez pasa alguno.
Estábamos promediando cientos de personas por día. A comparación de lo que estamos viendo actualmente, estamos promediando entre 40 a 50 personas a lo largo de todo el sector del Paso, que son aproximadamente 268 millas.
Recorrimos desde muy temprano esa zona con la patrulla fronteriza. Durante toda esa mañana, nadie intentó cruzar ni por las áreas remotas. En las zonas conocidas como Sunland Park o Santa Teresa, la actividad era muy fuerte de día y de noche. Ahora no pasa nadie ni por los cerros donde no hay muro.
8 estudiantes internacionales de la Universidad Estatal de Arizona podrían...
Y también esto, ¿no? Están revocando visa de estudiantes, lo que también está generando como malestar entre los jóvenes.
Verse obligados a abandonar Estados Unidos luego de que sus visas fueran revocadas.
Creo que está loco porque todos vienen a los Estados Unidos para oportunidades.
ASU no divulgó mayores detalles sobre las identidades de los estudiantes, pero dijo que ninguno era de Latinoamérica. También explicaron en un comunicado lo siguiente: estas revocaciones no están relacionadas con ninguna protesta. Parece que en la mayoría de los casos...
Bueno, y más que nada porque habían rajado a algunos que habían hecho unas protestas medio complicadas. Y después, esto es increíble, boludo, que uno no sabe siempre si es una joda, te tenés que estar fijando si es el usuario real de Trumpy o es uno en joda. El chabón, ¿no? Trump tira este tweet. Básicamente dice, estos hutíes se están juntando y dando instrucciones para un ataque. Ups, no va a haber ningún ataque de estos hutíes, ¿no? Y te sube a los hutíes estos que están ahí y que los agarra un misil. ¿No? El presidente de los Estados Unidos te pone como un asesinato en masa en Twitter. No, se están juntando unos hutíes para atacar, ¡pum! A la mierda los hutíes. Básicamente te tuitea eso. Es increíble, boludo. Es increíble. Mirá el cráter que dejó, boludo. ¿No? Hola hutíes, chau hutíes. Boludo. Pero es raro. Ahí Gustavo Camp dice en bravo, pero es raro, ¿no? Uno le pregunta, che, Grok, ¿este post es normal? No, no es normal. Que el presidente de los Estados Unidos poste video de asesinatos en masa en X. ¿No? Y algunos le dicen que esto era una juntada tribal, ¿no? Viste que te muestran eso. Y te dicen, esto es una juntada tribal, ¿no? Y te muestran estos guachines que se juntan así. No, pero es increíble. Hubieran ganado, boom, le tira a Romerito. Y después de eso te mostraba que hizo una tarjeta dorada que por 5 palos verdes puedes entrar a Yanquilandia, ¿no? Yanquilandia se convirtió es como cuando Macri se quedó con Boca, ¿no? ¿Querés ir a la cancha? Bueno, tenés que pagar un precio especial para ser socio y otro precio más para tener la chance de ir a la cancha. Pero pará, si pago socio y pago esto para poder ir a la cancha. ¿Puedo ir a la cancha? No. Para ir a la cancha tenés que pagar otra cosa más, ¿no? Es como Estados Unidos se transformó en la empresa de Trump ahora, ¿no? Si pagaste. Y aparte, la tarjeta tiene la cara de él, la tarjeta dorada. Es espectacular, boludo. $5 million. For $5 million, this could be yours.
was the first of the cards. And then, you know what that card is?
Gold card.
It's the gold card.
It's the gold
Trump
card.
Gold card.
Who's the first buyer?
Me.
Who's the second?
First. I don't know, but I'm the first buyer. It'll be out in about less than 2 weeks, probably.
¿Y para qué querés comprar una si vos ya sos ciudadano?
Pretty exciting, right?
Qué bizarro, boludo. Y acá lo tenemos al gran Ashman Gold, que estaba reaccionando al posteo ese. El ticket dorado de Willy Wonka, dicen.
I'll look. Apparently there's a Truth Social post. Let me go back and double check. And, oh, jeez. All right. Give me a minute. The Houthis gathered for instructions on an attack. Oops! There will be no attack by these Houthis. They will never sink our ships again. Can I watch this? Holy shit! Well, and then the tweet before this is only the weak will fail. Jesus Christ. Bro, he's tweeting this. He's tweeting, blowing these people up. Only the weak will fail, riding around in a golf cart. Oh my fucking God. Well, there we go. I'll look at...
Me dicen, este es el mugriento que no se baña. No sé si es mugriento que no se baña. El chabón, digamos, no vive como el momo, digamos, ¿no? Es más dejado, por decirlo de alguna manera. Pero no creo que no se bañe. Creo que vive como muy, muy humildemente el chabón. Y después acá tenemos, ¿no? Como hablan de cómo están reaccionando los países al Liberation Day de los aranceles de Trump.
Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time.
Liberation Day marked the launch of sweeping tariff policies that will reshape global trade. The day has come and gone, but the aftermath is leaving nations scrambling and economists warning of chaos.
April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
I think a better name for this day would be Watch Your Wallet Day, and I think Americans better start watching their wallets right away. I'm Mary Lovely.
Si hay videos que muestran que viven la mugre entre cucarachas, para tanto, boludo.
I'm an international trade economist. I am a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Well, I believe there's going to be a lot of chaos around this, especially because at the same time they revoked the so-called de minimis provision, which allowed packages under $800 to come in without the real fancy kind of customs treatment.
President Donald Trump's latest tariff campaign received a quick rebuke from nations on the receiving end of those penalties. As U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick made the media rounds Thursday morning, he pointed out the latest tariffs are a jumping-off point for the greatest dealmaker in the world.
We're talking with all of the major countries of the world, and we've been talking to them for more than a month. This has been coming. We've said it's been coming. The key is, will they take our agricultural products? Will they treat us fairly? Can they treat us fairly? And the answer is, over time, that is going to be yes. I think, for me, the greatest thing for me is that Donald Trump is sitting behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, and he is the greatest deal maker, and he will decide how he wants to play his hand.
Japanese Trade Minister Yoji Muto said he will urge the U.S. to exempt Japan from these tariffs. Japan faces 24% tariffs in Liberation Day's wake.
I think that countries are trying to figure out what Trump would want in a deal for these, to reduce these tariffs. But we have to realize that if he does, that goes against two of his stated objectives, which is one, to reshore activity to the United States. He's definitely been way out front promising Americans that. And if he rolls back the tariffs, well, doesn't that cancel that out? That's the incentive right there. And secondly, he doesn't get the tariff revenue that he needs to not explode the budget deficit. I worry about, what kind of deals other countries hope to cut with the trade team. Will these be transparent? How do they relate to U.S. law? One of the problems with arbitrary trade policy is that there is a lot of room for, if not the actual corruption, for the appearance of corruption. And the belief by foreigners that the U.S. Trade policy, commercial policy, no longer operates according to law.
Mary Lovely also cast doubt on countries following through with their deals.
Are they worth the paper that they're written on? We didn't see China really following through. Part of that was the pandemic. It was problems that Boeing had for idiosyncratic reasons, because, when China buys some aircraft, that's a big number. But overall, what is the staying power, sustainability of these personalized types of promises?
While the negotiating door is certainly open to the president behind the art of the deal, some nations are immediately choosing a retaliatory path. China, which faces a 34% tariff on top of an existing 20% rate, called on the U.S. to immediately lift its unilateral tariff measures and properly resolve differences with trading partners through equal dialogue. The EU is also vowing to react.
Bueno, acá tenemos un poquito de intro sobre el tema. Y ahora vamos a ir directamente, vamos a ver al secretario del Tesoro de Estados Unidos con el tema de las tarifas. Y acá vamos a escuchar un poco lo que les decía yo de cómo parece un típico discurso proteccionista del Guille Moreno o de algún peronismo más de ese estilo, ¿no?
Part of your job is to forecast like the effects of these policies that you have. We've got probably 1 out of 6 people in this country here illegally, maybe 50 million illegal aliens, and the president said he wants to deport them. Then you have AI, and the projections there are massive labor market disruption, fewer people needed. You alluded to that a minute ago. Then you have the tariffs, and like we can guess is their effect, but we don't really know because we've never done it. And then you have the reaction from the rest of the world to those tariffs. Like there's so many huge factors that are effectively unknown, that are black boxes. Really? Do you ever think like, wow, it's kind of hard to know what's going to happen?
Look, it is. And I always think that you can never be 100% sure, but you can stay within sight of guardrails and keep moving forward. I can't remember. One of the Sunday morning shows I was on a couple of weeks ago, the commentator asked me, she said, can you guarantee me there won't be a recession? And I said, I can't guarantee you anything. There's nothing that tells me there should be one. So I believe that this is going to work, just like President Reagan believed that supply side economics was going to work. But what I do know, that the old system wasn't working.
I think that's right.
And if you look at a system that's not working, you got to be brave to change it. So what wasn't working? Would it have been really fun for me to come in and just keep issuing a lot of debt? And it's almost like a bodybuilder is taking steroids. Outside looks great.
Esta es como la parte del discurso que es más parecido al de Milei, ¿no? Al del liberal que quiere achicar al Estado, ¿no? Dice, para mí hubiera sido mucho más fácil seguir tomando deuda, seguir jodiendo con el déficit, viste, ya empieza lo compara con un fisicoculturista con esteroides.
You're muscular, inside you're killing your vital organs. Yeah. That's what was going on here. But it would have been easy to keep pumping up the economy, borrowing a lot of money, creating a lot of government jobs. There was no controversy when we're doing all that.
No, digamos que tomando deuda, creando solamente empleos estatales, ¿no? Es prácticamente el discurso de Milei.
But you were going to end up in a calamity. If you go back and look, you look at the financial crisis in 07, 08, economy looked great right up until then. You go back and you look at the end of the dot-com bubble and then the whole credit problem, the fraud at WorldCom, Enron, some other companies, economy looked great until it didn't. And I think one of the things that we won't get credit for, but that this administration will have done, is avoiding a financial calamity. Think about it, that they've done an analysis that one of the reasons 9/11...
¿No? Y acá en Argentina, digamos, creo que el análisis de Milei pegó más en la gente porque tuviste el último gobierno de Cristina, el de Macri y Alberto, con una inflación cada vez más galopante y con cada vez más Estado sin solucionar nada. Entonces como que la gente, o una gran porción del pueblo argentino, digamos, compró la idea de, bueno, basta de estar emitiendo, despilfarrando, sin generar, ¿no?, ahorro, sin crecer, y entendió la parte del ajuste. Yo creo que el pueblo yanqui no está todavía en gran medida del lado del ajuste, ¿no? Todavía como hay mucha más gente que ve con malos ojos el recorte que están haciendo. No, creo que acá hay más gente que se dio cuenta que había un argumento que justificaba que en algún momento se empiece a achicar el gasto del Estado, ¿no? Por la coyuntura. En Estados Unidos pareciera que la gente todavía no la vio, o no la vio como la ve el gobierno de Trump.
11 happened because the airlines didn't want to pay for reinforced doors.
Yes.
They kept pushing back. FAA didn't push hard enough. And now, we've got the reinforced doors. So I look at it, we're putting on the reinforced doors before the crash.
What's the scramble, the lobbying scramble by foreign governments going to be like over the next 3 months? Because the president said yesterday, we're putting a universal tariff, one standard, but then, of course, each country's adjusted according to a lot of different factors, trade deficit, currency manipulation, regulation, and then tariffs. But, this is all, as you said, a moving picture. It's a developing situation. So, like, if pick a country, Vietnam.
Ahí Esteban dice, che, Mate, o Jordi o Pela está afuera. Elon, ¿es verdad? No, hubo un rumor, pero todos los días lo están operando a Elon en la relación con Trump. No, ya salieron a desmentirlo.
China, I'm going to really try to bring pressure to bear on this administration to adjust those numbers. Like, what's that going to be like?
It's going to be the president's decision. And I think his view is this has been going on for a long time for friends and foes. And we're going to see where this plays out. I think what's going to be more important than the discussion with countries is the discussion with companies. So what do companies want to do? As President Trump said yesterday, best way to get around the tariffs, build your factory here.
Yeah.
And what can we do here at Treasury to help that? We're pushing to get the tax bill done so we can guarantee the low taxes, full depreciation within the first year. We're working with Secretaries Burgum and Wright on energy security, and we're working.
Yo creo que por eso es importante si Milei logra algún tipo de tratado de libre comercio con Yanquilandia. Porque si termina ganando Trump en este reordenamiento mundial, va a haber mucho incentivo para las grandes empresas y para la inversión extranjera en ir a Yanquilandia, en vez de ir a países emergentes como el nuestro. Pero si Milei logra algún intercambio de libre comercio, ahí tiene algún incentivo en venir una empresa acá a la Argentina porque vas a tener costos más baratos que en Yanquilandia y le vas a poder seguir vendiendo al mercado yanqui sin aranceles. Es el único incentivo, me parece, que hoy le podés dar en este cambio tan grande que está haciendo Trumpy para que vengan a la Argentina, ¿no? Algo a largo plazo, ahora que tienen el RIGI, y aparte que les permita comerciar con Yanquilandia sin aranceles. Hay que ver si Milei vuelve con algún tratado, no sé si de libre comercio, pero con algún tratado en donde por lo menos productos importantes no tengan aranceles, ¿no?
On getting the regulations down. The president, I don't know whether he talked about it yesterday or the day before, Taiwan Semi, largest semiconductor manufacturer in the world, Lee Zeldin.
El problema con el Tratado de Libre Comercio es que nosotros somos parte del Mercosur, que ya tiene como aranceles. Pero bueno, vamos a ver qué hacen.
The EPA commissioner is working to push through all the permits that they need.
Ay, Matías Ledema dice, costo más barato que en Yanquilandia, Argentina es carísima en dólares. Amigo, anda a fijarte. Ese tipo de frases son las pelotudeces más grandes que no. ¿Vos en serio te pensás que Argentina es más cara que Estados Unidos en dólares? Andá a alquilar un departamento en Nueva York o en cualquier lado. Andá al supermercado, boludo. Hay cosas que es inentendible. ¿Cómo piensan? Inentendible, boludo. Creer que Argentina tiene costos más caros que los yanquis, boludo. Es increíble. Un sueldo, ¿vos te parece que algún yanqui gana $1.000 como un buen sueldo? Ni el trabajando en McDonald's ganas menos de $1.000 en Yanquilandia. Por Dios, boludo. Tengan un poquito de sentido común. Maurave dice, poco se habla de que le conviene a algunas empresas facturar en Argentina por tener aranceles más bajos que acá y exportarlo a Yanquilandia. Bueno, el tema es ese, si logra algún tratado de libre comercio.
Because we've just gone into this regulatory morass where it takes so long to get things done in this country. So I think what will be more interesting are the individual company announcements more than the country announcements.
You want to sell to Americans, you got to make it in America.
Sure. Or pay the tariff.
Here's the facts of life you may not learn until you're older, but I'm going to tell you now. It's very hard to have a good time if you're wearing bad boots. In fact, it may be impossible, and that's why you need Tecovas. As a matter of fact, you don't just need them in their face. It's about every country on the globe, but it's really more than any other country about China, I think it's fair to say. How are they going to respond? What's their retaliation look like?
Well, I don't know if they can retaliate for a couple of reasons. If you look at the history, and I used to teach economic history, and when you look at the history, we are the debtor nation.
Yes.
We have the trade deficits. The surplus nation is in the weaker position because the Chinese business model, and Tucker, by the way, the Chinese business model and the economy are the most imbalanced in the history of the modern world. We've never seen anything like this in terms of their export level relative to their GDP, relative to their population. So,
bueno, chupapija, anda a ponerte una empresa en Estados Unidos a ver si podés, si tenemos costo más barato. Vos estás confundiendo las cosas, no estoy confundiendo precio con costo, retrasado mental. Vos acá no tiene nada que ver, aparte como si no tuviera que ver. Digamos, vos aún de trabajar en Estados Unidos, los costos laborales son mucho más caros que en Argentina. Tenés que pagar sueldos mucho más caros. ¿Vos te pensás que el trabajo no es un costo en tu empresa? No es un costo el trabajo en tu empresa. Que a un tipo le tengas que pagar $3.000, $4.000 de sueldo no es un costo comparado con los 1.000 que le pagás acá. No tiene nada que ver. ¿Por qué le tenés que pagar a un yanqui más caro? Porque todo es más caro en Yanquilandia. Pero bueno, boludo. Chao, amiguito. Baneado para siempre. Andá a algún canal de algún pelotudo que le interese tu opinión.
I think it is going to be very difficult for them to try to change the model. They're in a deflationary recession/depression.
Hay que ser pelotudo para creer que en Estados Unidos tenés más costo más caro que para pensar que en Argentina tiene costo más caro que Estados Unidos. Hay que ser pelotudo, ¿eh? Hay que ser pelotudo. No, confundís costos con precio. Bueno, retrasado, volví a la escuela.
Right now, they're trying to export their way out of it, and we let them do that. But I think that when you think the Chinese manufacturing system is like that old Disney movie with the brooms carrying the buckets.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. Like, that's their business model. It's not going to stop. Now, what could happen if you were to say, Scott, look, what's the dream scenario? That somehow there could be a deal where the U.S. and China, we want more manufacturing, which would mean a smaller part of the economy's consumption. The Chinese have this imbalanced economy with too much manufacturing, and actually the Chinese consumers really get the short end of the stick. So Chinese households, they're called in what's called the middle.
Y a mí me da gracia, ¿no? Que hablen acá también, Romerito, habla de la ley laboral, boludo. Viven en una burbuja de pedo ustedes, amigos. Estados Unidos, desde hace mucho tiempo, es el país que te hace juicio por cualquier cosa. O si no te hace un juicio, vos te pensás que te hacen un juicio, ni siquiera necesitas hacer un juicio laboral. El otro día ganó un juicio un tipo como en Seinfeld que Starbucks le dio un café muy caliente y se quemó, amigos. Entonces, ¿me vienen a hablar de la industria del juicio en Argentina? Cuando la industria del juicio en Estados Unidos, los médicos no quieren... Un médico que va caminando por la calle ve a un accidente y no quiere atenderlo por miedo a que le hagan un juicio por mala praxis. Y acá, boludo, me repiten pelotudos. No, la industria del juicio, dejen de ver TN, retrasados. ¿Ustedes se creen que Argentina no es rentable por la industria del juicio para una gran empresa que viene a la Argentina a invertir, que tienen un bufete de abogados? Eso te puede afectar si sos una pyme, un kiosco, es para lo local. Digamos, se vienen acá a hacer los cancheros y después me dicen, no, vos te crees que te la sabes toda. Yo no me la sé toda, estoy dando mi opinión. Los que creen que son unos vivos bárbaros son los boludos que vienen a opinar en el chat, que están haciendo una paja al mismo tiempo mientras están mirando no sé qué pelotudez, y opinan como si fuesen expertos en todo. Son tan inteligentes, tienen una opinión tan valiosa, ármense un canal y denla a ver si alguien los mira. Boludo, es increíble la cantidad de pelotudeces que dicen y se creen que son unos vivos bárbaros. De última, plantea un argumento, ¿no? Decí lo que pensás, no. Te empiezan a decir, no, que cualquier pelotudez, hablan como si fuesen expertos. Y me tratan a mí como si yo fuese un soberbio que tengo la verdad. No, amigo, te digo lo que pienso con un poco de sentido común, me puedo equivocar. Ahora, las pelotudeces que dicen en el chat son de no creer.
Middle income trap that could we do something together to say, okay, you rebalance, you consume more, manufacture less. We are going to consume less and manufacture more, and we'll be military rivals. There'll still be an economic rivalry, but we're going to level the playing field by a lot. Now, that's not going to happen tomorrow. That's not going to happen in a month, but over the next few years, they may have to come around because I think their business model is broken. I think President Trump's broken their business model with these tariffs.
So you're describing, the famous scenario where if you take a bank loan, the bank is in charge. They can repossess whatever you borrowed against. But if you take a big enough loan, you're kind of in charge of the bank.
Exactly. And they've just got such a big deficit with us that
they need our markets.
They can't survive without them.
Are you confident that they're...
No cuesta nada armarse un canal, Actón. Con un celular, no necesita ni micrófono.
There's like a clear enough channel of communication between the two governments that the details can be worked out and that nothing will go crazy in the meantime?
Well, I think what gives me a lot of confidence is the relationship between President Trump and Chairman Xi.
Yes.
That when you have a direct line of communication at the very top, then I think it's very difficult for things to go haywire.
Interesting. What about the rest of the world? What about Europe?
Look, the Europeans, we look back and there was the famous meeting where President Trump told the Europeans, you're insane for building Nord Stream 2. What are you doing? You already get most of your energy from Russia and you're going to double down on it?
Tal cual.
And they did. And look what happened. So
we blew it up.
Somebody did.
Somebody did.
Somebody did.
Probably Putin.
I know some Norwegian fishermen bumped into it, is what I read. But the Europeans go kicking and screaming, but I think they're going to have to rebalance too. Germany has a very imbalanced export economy, and they were on the verge of deindustrialization. They were the opposite of us. They had expensive energy.
Yes.
They were depending on Italy and the countries in the south to keep the euro suppressed, and they were selling into China, and now China is becoming their competitor.
Sí, sí. Ya vimos que China se tomó toda la industria automotriz de Rusia, por lo que le habían puesto todas las trabas por la guerra, y ahora se va a quedar con Europa China, porque los europeos están cogidos, boludo. China le va a terminar, ahora que van a quebrar o van a tener un montón de problemas automotrices europeos, que van a tener un montón de problemas empresas europeas que vendían solo a Yanquilandia o que se beneficiaban mucho de esos mercados, que no te empiece a sorprender que empiezan a comprar capitales chinos todas esas empresas y empiezan a tener otro tipo de manejo con el mundo.
Like 55 years, Wall Street really has been the commonly recognized measure of economic health. Like, how's the Dow doing? We've got entire TV channels devoted to tracking its progress, which has mostly been up during the course of my life. So if the average of, the equity averages fall, if the stock market falls, that's seen by a lot of people as like a measure that the economy itself is is in decline. Do you think that's a fair measure?
Look, the market goes up and down. Warren Buffett has a saying, in the short run, the market's a voting machine. In the long run, it's a weighing machine. And in the long run, it's going to weigh, do we have good policies?
Yes.
And I in my former business, I commented on market structure, market ups and downs a lot. I'm trying not to do that.
Yes.
But for everyone who thinks that these market declines are all based on the president's economic policies, I can tell you that this market decline started with the Chinese AI announcement of DeepSeek.
Right.
So the so-called Mag 7, the tech stocks, had been doing very well for about 18 months, led the market, and I think that there was kind of a real dose of reality in what was going on in AI. And I think U.S. is going to remain the leader in AI, but the AI-related stocks started coming down. So, like, if I were to analyze in my old hat, and this is the only time I'm going to talk about it, my old hat, what's happening with the market, I'd say it's more a Mag 7 problem and not a MAGA problem.
Right. So it's a deeper. So actually, the markets are, you're saying in this specific case with tech stocks, are taking like a real measure of the value of companies relative to foreign companies.
Well, it's that. But if we look, with the equal weighted S&P, even after today's moves, down 4% in the year. Or, in a long-term chart, you wouldn't even notice that.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing that we can do, that I can do as the Treasury Secretary, that President Trump wants to do, is put in sound fundamentals for the underlying economy. And if the underlying economy is good, if taxes are stable, if businesses have predictability, if we have cheap and plentiful energy, if we deregulate, if we treat our workforce well, then we're going to have a great stock market.
Fair. The president suggested in describing his plan for tariffs, he said, look, you could conceivably fund a lot of government with tariffs. And that would suggest that taxpayers fund less of the burden. And so do you expect that the...
Y ves como acá, al revés, ¿no? Que acá en Milei te dice, vamos a achicar el Estado y con eso voy a necesitar menos recursos y voy a sacarte impuestos. Acá están diciendo, voy a achicar el Estado, pero con los recursos que me den los aranceles voy a poder bajarte los impuestos porque no voy a necesitar tantos para dar los servicios que doy, ¿no?
These will be accompanied by a congressionally approved tax cut for the middle class.
Tucker, I just want to go back for a moment, too, that one of the things that the tariffs are doing is we are pushing back against other economic systems. So the Chinese have a very different economic system. They have low cost, some would call it literally slave labor. They subsidize industry with subsidized loans. They have a lot of non-tariff barriers. Your show can't be shown there.
Yes.
So we're pushing back against that, and with the tariff income, it can be substantial. And if we think like a classical model of tariff income would say, if there's a 10% tariff, then the currency would appreciate about 40% of that, so 4% of it. Then the producer in the other country would eat about 4%. And then the U.S. consumer might have a one-time price adjustment of 2%. So, in a 10% tariff, maybe the consumer pays 2% of it. We saw there's a study out recently from a group at MIT that shows that with President Trump's first China tariffs, which were approximately 20%, the price level went up 0.7. So to answer your question, if we could put on a 20% tariff and have the foreigners pay that and use that money to bring down our government deficit and keep taxes low here, that's a very unique formula that hasn't been tried in this country for a long time.
Here's a fact of life you may not learn until you're older, but I'm going to tell you now. It's .com/Tucker. Set by the Congress. So,
well, what we're going to have now, we are in this very odd, what I would call betwixt and between the tariff income and what DOGE is doing in terms of the cutting government expenses. So CBO scoring, and for 35 years, I was on the other side of the wall, and I would always, oh, well, CBO says this. And I didn't really realize that kind of CBO scoring is a lot like Enron accounting, that it's not real. And when you actually look at the real scoring.
But you assumed it was on the outside?
Sure. Well, they're experts.
It's a congressional budget office.
It's a congressional budget office. And they're well-intentioned people. They just have the nonsensical rules. Like, think about this. When all the scoring's done over a 10-year window.
Yes. Okay?
So they just assume 1.7 or 1.8% economic growth over the 10 years. And that never moves. Whether you raise taxes or cut taxes, doesn't move. So that's what, like during the campaign, when Vice President Harris was announcing all these big tax increases she wanted to do and things like that, that the CBO was scoring her very well. And President Trump wants to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. That was kind of a blowout number because obviously growth's going to go up a lot when you cut taxes. So, but that was a long way of saying we will not get credit for the tariffs in any bill because Congress is not going to legislate it. President's doing it with executive authority, but the money will be coming in. We've already taken in several $100 million on the China tariffs from his first term. We take in about $35 billion a year just on the old tariffs, not on the new ones. So in the CBO window, that's about $350 billion, which pays for a lot of the president's promises on no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, making interest deductibility on autos made in the U.S. And think what the president's doing here. He is backing into an affordability solution for the bottom 50% of wage earners, because they're the ones who will benefit from all four of those programs.
So looking out, say, a year from now, so beginning of next April, do you have any sense of how much the U.S. government anticipates bringing in from the tariffs announced yesterday?
It's going to be a moving target.
For sure.
But could it be anywhere from $300 billion to $600 billion a year? Sure.
Okay, so that's meaningful revenue.
Very meaningful. But what will happen with tariffs over time, the ultimate goal of the tariffs, and the president says it all the time, bring your factory here. That's the best solution toward getting away from a tariff wall. So move your factory from China, from Mexico, from Vietnam, bring it here. So what will happen over time, we'll have substantial tariff income in the beginning. Manufacturers will build their factory here. The tariffs will drop, but the revenue from the factories, from income taxes, from all the new jobs will go up. So we'll be taking it in domestically as the tariffs drop. And why are the tariffs dropping? Because we're making it here and our trade deficit's dropping.
Teníamos esto y ahora vamos a ver cómo lo vieron los distintos medios, ¿no? Este es uno que se llama Liberal Hive Mind, que es como si fuese un termo de Milley, pero es un termo de Trumpy, ¿no?
By what Scott Bessent has to say.
The distribution of equities across households, the top 10% of Americans own 88% of equities, 88% of the stock market. The next 40% owns 12% of the stock market. The bottom 50 has debt. They have credit card bills, they rent their homes, they have auto loans, and we've got to give them some relief. That I was struck by the statistic from last year.
That's the message right there. Just as a bystander, I'm like, wow, okay.
All right. Or that I like the examples, and I was really struck by two different statistics last year. Summer of 2024, Americans took more European vacations than they had in history. Summer of 2024, more Americans were using food banks than they ever have in history. I went into 2 food banks near my hometown to ask.
Vos fijate que básicamente este discurso se junta un poco con el de Bernie Sanders, ¿no? Que dice que todo en Estados Unidos los tiene solamente el 1%. Y acá te estaba diciendo, ¿no? Como el 10% de... No siquiera era el 10% o el 1%, no sé, de la gente tenía como el 10% de la población tiene el 88% de el mercado de financiero, le pertenece, digamos. Y como el 40% tenía, no sé, el 33%, algo así decía, y el otro 50% de la población yanqui no tiene nada, tiene solo deudas, ¿no? Y te decía, como al mismo tiempo que es el 2024 fue el año en que más de estadounidenses veranearon en Europa, y al mismo tiempo fue el periodo en donde más gente necesitó ir a un banco de alimentos porque no tenía para comprar comida. Y es interesante cómo se está tocando tanto la narrativa del gobierno de Trump con la narrativa de la parte más progre de los demócratas que no dejaron ni competir en las últimas elecciones, ¿no? A Bernie Sanders siempre lo dejaron atrás y pusieron a alguien más conservador como Biden o después Kamala Harris.
What's the story? And they said, you know, it really takes, for a lot of people, it's a loss of dignity to walk in a food bank. Of course. But they were seeing a new phenomenon, that it wasn't their traditional clientele. It wasn't people who'd lost their homes. It wasn't people out on the street. These were working families who could no longer, $100 at the grocery store, that basket of groceries every week, they were missing 5, 6, 7 things, and they were coming to the food bank to top up. So that's not a great America. Record European vacation, record food banks.
Yeah. You want to talk about a sick economy? The top 10% of Americans own 88% of the stock market. The next 40% have the scraps, just 12%, and the bottom 50% own nothing. In fact, it's worse than owning nothing. They carry debt. They're essentially economic hostages of this broken system. Of course, while Wall Street plays its little casino game with speculative AI stocks and inflated valuations backed by absolutely nothing. That's what the people I think need to start understanding. This economy is a house of cards, a hallucination built on debt, fake numbers, and printed money. They call it the strongest economy in the world, yet more people are using food banks in 2024 than ever before? More than any time in recent American history? Yeah, well, it's obvious what's happening, right? This economy isn't built for you, it's built for them. It's built for the elite ruling class that's selling you out. And that's a point I've been really trying to drive home, and I've been trying to describe, and hopefully I'm doing a good job at doing it. But just think about it, logically. Sure, we're seeing record profits in the stock market. We're seeing record profits for all the multinational corporations. But are the American people really benefiting there? Of course not. Because what's happening? The jobs are being shipped overseas. The manufacturing process is shipped overseas. A lot of the raw materials coming from overseas. And so basically you have these massive companies that are leapfrogging the American workers. They're taking advantage of cheap labor abroad. They're sending money abroad, contracts abroad.
Y esto es una de las cosas por las que ganó también Trump en su primera presidencia, que era traer de vuelta el trabajo para los yanquis, ¿no? Que se terminó acrecentándole el problema para cuando ganó esta segunda presidencia.
And skimming off the top of those contracts. Meanwhile, the American middle class is left dry, empty-handed, with nothing. Actually, I want to use this video. I think it's going to help make the point.
Here's the reality.
No, mira, y vos fíjate esto, Cómo te lo explica como si fuese el Guille Moreno, mira.
Nobody's talking about. This lighter costs $25 in America to buy an American-made product. China makes one, sells it for $20 here in America. Out of that $20 one, in America, all $25 stays in America. So now we want to say, let's balance this out, and we're going to put a 50% tariff on Chinese goods. Now this lighter costs $30 to sell in the United States. Now you have the US-made one at $25. It is cheaper. It's more expensive in the big picture, I get it, but it's now cheaper, so people are going to buy the American-made one. 100% of the $25 that you spend stays in America, stays here. The demand increases for that business has to hire employees. When many businesses hire employees, that creates a supply shortage of employees, which make wages go up. Is this more expensive for the consumer in the short term? Yes. But you're getting a better product. You're getting a better product for your money, and the money is staying local, okay? You're not funding these other countries and their businesses. That is the purpose behind all of this. Will we have a recession? Yes. Will prices go up in the short term? Yes. But the lagging effect is all of that money now stays here. It's not leaving the country, which gives us more money in the United States to go around. Of course, every nation in the world is going to say, we're being bad neighbors and bad business partners. Well, of course, we've made them rich.
Exactly that. The money is being made by foreign countries, and then the very few wealthy elite in America who are soaking up those massive profit margins at the top. Meanwhile, the American worker is getting poorer and poorer. And
Nacho Libre dice, los chinos van a bajar a la mitad el encendedor. Y puede ser. En vez de darle 2 platos de arroz a los esclavos, le van a dar 1 y te bajan a la mitad.
Poorer and plays less of a role in the American economy. And it's funny because the left is always accusing Donald Trump of doing the bidding of him and his billionaire friends, right? Donald Trump and his billionaire friends. Well, don't you find it funny how his actual policy agenda has the billionaire class, the speculation class, the asset class totally freaking out? You know, if Donald Trump was really doing the bidding of the wealthy elite, do you think his policies would be causing total mayhem for the Wall Street and multinational globalist elite? I mean, give me a break. Obviously, he isn't playing their game. No, he's trying to reset the game, reset the system, to stop the bleeding, to cut off the grift, and to bring the American middle class roaring back. You think Wall Street hates what Donald Trump is doing because it's bad policy? Or is it more that they're freaking out that their endless cash cow of cheap overseas labor and unrestricted global outsourcing is now being threatened? Trump is simply doing exactly what he promised. He's sticking out his neck, he's sacrificing himself, he's taking a beating in the media and from the controlling elite class so he can fight for the middle class. And I think the one person who's doing a really good job at
Es un luchador de la clase media, Trump, y al final.
explaining this in the media is again Batya Ungar-Sargon, who, by the way, I'm going to reiterate, is a self-described leftist.
A lot of people on the right struggle to understand why the Democrats keep picking on 80-20 issues, the 20, right?
Yeah.
And the reason is because the divide in this country is not political. It is a class divide that separates out the 20% of the over-credentialed college elites from the 70-80% of Americans who are middle and working class. Trump has unified those people around a common sense, middle of the road agenda. People who don't feel that things are going in the right direction, this is the Democrats' base, the elites. The elites are very polarized. And of course, Wall Street, for 3 election cycles in a row, picked the Democrats over Donald Trump because they don't like the fact that his entire economic agenda is designed to put money in the pockets of working class Americans, middle class Americans, bring the American dream back for the average person who has been forgotten. What President Trump did was he realized that the entire middle class and working class of this country had been abandoned, and he turned the GOP into the party of the working class. These are people who hate the open border because it comes at their expense, of course, when you import millions and millions of low-wage laborers to compete with them. They love tariffs because tariffs make the product of the labor of the working class competitive in the global market. It's rich people who hate tariffs, and that's who the Democrats apparently are catering to. Let's be clear.
Bueno, y ahí teníamos un poquito cómo lo están viendo este medio que es full Trumpy. Y ahora vamos a ver un poquito cómo lo ve el otro lado de la grieta, ¿no? Los super progres. ¿Dónde tengo esto que era interesante? A ver, acá. Este lo vamos a ver antes de pasar a... porque tiene más que ver con esto. Vamos a verlo ahora. Me parece interesante. ¿Dónde lo dejé? Dale, Richie. Acá. Acá tenemos a The Majority Report con Sam Seder, que bueno, estos son super progres. A ver cómo la ven estos, ¿no?
Stock market.
Morrison dice, Pela, pero esto va en contra de todo lo que dijo el Javo en economía. Sí, es completamente lo opuesto a lo que plantea acá Milei, ¿no? Lo que pasa es que Yanquilandia viene de un proceso de hace por lo menos de los 80, en donde fue expulsando algunamente la producción en Yanquilandia y la fue de alguna manera como exportando a otros países, ¿no? Desde los 80 para acá que Estados Unidos fue perdiendo la industria automotriz, la industria que tiene que ver con la ropa, la industria que tiene que ver con lo tecnológico y con un montón de otras cosas, inclusive de un montón de otras cosas, ¿no? De maquinaria y demás, que se empezó a fabricar afuera. Vos tenés, por ejemplo, no sé, Nike o otras empresas yanquis, ¿no? O que en otras épocas tenían fábricas en Estados Unidos, o Apple, por ejemplo, o fabricaban afuera, en la India, en México, en China, porque bueno, tenían costos más baratos, ¿no? Que en Estados Unidos, lo que no entendía el pelotudo que venía hace un rato. Un país, ¿no? Una empresa que está radicada en un país, se va a producir a otro porque tiene costos más baratos, o porque tiene ventajas competitivas, si no lo va a hacer, sobre todo si su mercado más grande es de donde es original. Entonces venía con un proceso de pérdida de trabajo yanqui, más la inmigración, ¿no? Que siempre, digamos, más o menos fue igual, pero que se descontroló en los últimos 10 años. Cada vez tenías menos laburo en Yanquilandia. Hay un montón de videos que vos ves de youtubers en Estados Unidos que visitan distintas ciudades que no son las que conocemos, y que vos veías cómo a los inmigrantes refugiados le pagaban un alquiler, le daban comida, le regalaban o le daban una licencia de conducir prácticamente sin hacer lo que tenían que hacer. Y los yanquis decían, yo no tengo laburo, no me dan nada, encima están haciendo que suban los alquileres en mi zona. Y se habían generado un choque cultural muy grande, ¿no? Veíamos cómo en Springfield, una ciudad con 60.000 habitantes, le cayeron 20.000 haitianos, que todos los días había algún quilombo con los haitianos, había un choque cultural gigante. Más otras ciudades como Detroit, ahí que dice Nacho Libre, que eran profundamente automotrices, ¿no? De industria automotriz, y se fueron convirtiendo en ciudades más dedicadas a los servicios y demás, porque ya no producían. Toda esa masa laboral que fue perdiendo Yanquilandia y que tuvieron que ir los yanquis agarrando a laburos cada vez más chotos, hicieron que todo lo que era el sueño americano, la clase media yanqui, cada vez sea más chota. Y encima, en la crisis del 2008, mucha de esa clase media perdió todo. Tenía gente que estaba viviendo en parques, en plazas, en la calle, en su auto. Hace poco salió una nota de una argentina que vivía en Yanquilandia que le decían que era un homeless VIP porque vivía en su auto. Hay un montón de yanquis que viven en el auto y que son tipo trabajadores de golondrina de Amazon, ponele. Entonces venían perdiendo mucho eso, y cuando Trump gana es un poco por eso, porque Trump le proponía al americano básico, al que le dicen white trash, ¿no? O al que le dicen redneck, o a la clase media base, de que iba a volver a darle laburo a ellos. Y bueno, y esa es un poco la narrativa, ¿no? Veremos si con esto de los aranceles vuelve a generar trabajo para los yanquis, pero lo habían perdido en gran cantidad. Vamos a ver qué dicen los progres, a ver si los podemos ver o son iguales de boludo que acá.
Tanked yesterday. It's back to I think September 2024 levels. There's a lot of stock market people who are upset, but and of course this is just another prime example of why you may not want all of your eggs in the 401k basket. The last time we had a stock market crash like this was during COVID, but of course that was, to a large extent, that was because people weren't sure what was going to happen.
Ram Taban dice, pero hay que verle el lado bueno a las cosas. Como colombiano estoy conforme, ese 46% de arancel a Vietnam no sacó un competidor en el sector café.
Prior to that, it was the 2008 financial crisis. it took about 5 or 6 years for the stock market to return to.
No, y esto es lo increíble. Los tenés a los progres hablando del mercado, del mercado financiero, algo que supuestamente despreciaban porque era el 1%, ¿no? Jugando a el casino con los ingresos de todos, ¿no? Leonel dice: aranceles en Asia y la Unión Europea podría ayudar a la industria argentina. ¿Sería más competitivo el país con arancel 10%? Sí. O si logra que tenga menor arancel, ¿no? Veremos.
2008 levels. I don't think it did maybe until
¿Qué es lo que decía hace un rato? Si Milei logra tener menores aranceles en Argentina, ¿no? Porque toda esta movida de Trumpy es un incentivo para que empresas vuelvan a producir en Yanquilandia. Entonces puede hacer que mucha inversión extranjera se vuelque a Yanquilandia. Argentina sería atractivo si logra que haya menos aranceles todavía, porque podría venir a fabricar a Argentina y venderle al mercado yanqui con menores costos que poner una fábrica en Estados Unidos, ¿no?
2014. And if you had decided and been anticipating retiring at age 65, you may have had to wait until you were 70, or you may have had a lot less money than you had anticipated. So the stock market, obviously important in the lives of a lot of people, particularly, obviously, people who are looking to retire.
No, y aparte está hablando, ¿no? Como si los jubilados son los que están en el mercado financiero. ¿Te das cuenta que los progres son igual en todo el mundo? De golpe defienden a la bolsa como si fuesen pobres jubilados que están timbeando para jubilarse antes. Por Dios, boludo.
But it makes the importance of Social Security that much more obvious. Social Security, it is completely within our control how much money you will get when you hit retirement age. But really, the real problem with the tariffs is ultimately going to be the inflation that it causes. And then the rejiggering of...
Y después me da gracia que hablen de las tarifas con el tema de inflación cuando tuvieron todo el gobierno de Biden con una inflación terrible, ¿no? Ahí no se quejaban de la inflación.
The relationship the United States has...
Emilio dice, no se están refiriendo a seguro de retiro, se me ocurre. Sí, pero digamos, en la bolsa no están... A ver, los seguros de retiro pueden tener una parte de activos financieros y demás, pero no podés estar hablando de defendiendo o quejándote de la caída en la bolsa por estos reordenamientos. Pero, ¿qué eso es el tema, no? Los progres en Estados Unidos tendrían que estar de acuerdo con esto. El problema es que no están de acuerdo porque están en contra de Trump. Porque para un progre en Estados Unidos que lo quería votar a Bernie Sanders, todo esto, a la larga, está protegiendo el trabajo americano. Puede generar inflación, puede generar alguna que otra cosa, si es que no achican el déficit fiscal, ¿no? Y siguen tomando deuda y siguen emitiendo. Si no, va a generar un poco de inflación en el ordenamiento y después se va a equiparar. El tema es, deberían estar de acuerdo los progres, porque le devuelve el trabajo a los yanquis, porque hace que los productos yanquis sean más competitivos, por lo menos dentro de Estados Unidos. Entonces, que estén en contra porque te dicen que la crisis financiera hizo que bajen los volúmenes de lo que, no sé, de algunas pensiones que tenían activos financieros, que eso es ridículo. ¿Entendés? Que te diga que va a generar inflación es ridículo cuando venís de la inflación que venís con Biden, que por emitir plata para regalarle a Ucrania. Por eso es como muy raro, ¿no? La postura de lo que es el progre yankee, que está en contra, que están en contra de Trump por ser Trump. Y le encuentran la vuelta a esto para estar en contra, cuando si lo hubiera hecho, no sé, Bernie Sanders, estarían a favor.
With the rest of the world. Because, you know, you get a couple mulligans, but at one point the rest of the world goes, they're insane. And we don't necessarily need them as much as they think we do. Obviously, we have a big consumer base, but if we make their products 50% higher overnight, that consumer base is really not terribly relevant to them. We'll talk more about this with...
Y sí, pero digamos, ¿por qué a un yankee le debería importar, ¿no?, la rentabilidad de una empresa extranjera vendiendo, no vertiendo en Yanquilandia, cuando los yanquis pueden fabricar todo? Es raro el planteo progre contra contra Trump, la verdad.
David Dayen, but this is, and Dayen has a theory that these aren't even really tariffs. They're just sort of some type of vindictive punishment, or I mean, there is no cohesive policy around this.
Bueno, y acá él dice, no hay ni una política cohesiva o coherente en torno a esto. Y para mí sí la hay. Después habrá que ver si funciona o no. Pero la crítica del progre es increíble. Parece antiamericano, ¿no? Anti-yankee parece. Y esto es lo que quiero que vean, porque esto me parecía que era un buen ejemplo de, antes de seguir con las noticias internacionales, que ya estamos terminando y pasando al resto, es un buen ejemplo de la historia argentina al tema económico, de que Argentina pasó de liberal o de libre comercio a proteccionista, igual que lo hicieron otras potencias del mundo, pero acá dice que en Argentina no funcionó por distintos temas y por coyunturas globales, que cuando Argentina lo hizo, el mundo estaba para otro lado, ¿no?
This is Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires, 100 years ago, a rich, rapidly developing city with inhabitants that, on paper, look to be on the path of becoming as rich as Britain, just like other upcoming nations like Canada and Germany. However, after 1930, Argentina stagnated and then declined after 1976, while the other countries just kept growing along with Britain. This century of relative decline earned Argentina the questionable honor of being the only country in the world that regressed from advanced to developing economy status. So, what happened? What caused Argentina's unique decline? Milei supporters will tell you that protectionism and state interference under people like Perón and the Kirchners is to blame, while opponents will tell you that actually hardcore free market fundamentalism has been tried in Argentina many times, for example under the military junta in 76, Menem in the 90s, Macri in 2015, and this always ended in a massive economic collapse. But what if both of them are right? What if there's a much deeper story that can explain Argentina's terrible economy under both left and right-wing approaches? If you're interested in that story, then this video is for you. So sit back and relax as we take a deep dive into the sad story of Argentina, 100 years of economic decline. Starting with the growth miracle years in which Argentina supposedly became a rich country, the years from 1860 to 1929. Chapter 1. A deceptive growth miracle. This graph shows Argentina's per person GDP as a percentage of what was at the time the richest economy in the world, Great Britain. Throughout its miracle years, the income of the average Argentinian arose from 42% of that of Britain in 1860 to almost 80% in 1929. This dynamic made Argentina look much more similar to successful British settler colonies like Canada than more typical Latin American countries like Brazil. So, what caused this? Why was Argentina growing so fast, and how did that compare to Canada and Brazil? According to recent economic research, the most likely explanation comes from the gradual opening up of Argentina's economy since independence, combined with rapid globalization and new shipbuilding technologies, which rapidly reduced the prices of Argentinian imports while raising the prices of what they could earn with agricultural exports such as wheat and livestock. Therefore, during this era, it became increasingly profitable for Argentinian farmers to invest in the exploitation of Argentina's massive, fertile, underdeveloped Pampean grasslands, which they could do thanks to the increased availability of British capital. Meanwhile, Brazil and other Latin American nations did not have these fertile lands and instead depended heavily on exporting far less valuable resources like coffee. On the other hand, while Argentina's growth miracle looked a lot like that of Canada on paper, Canada's growth was much more broad-based, as by this time it had already developed a healthy manufacturing sector. Interestingly enough, while Argentina had profited immensely from increased free trade under globalization, Canada had during this same time period increasingly turned to tariffs to protect its industries. So, in short, Argentina's economic boom was mostly a consequence of them opening up their economy at a time that the products from their main natural resource, fertile land, was in very high demand. In that sense, it was not very different from the rest of Latin America. It's just that they got much more lucky with their geography for this specific time period. Luck that would soon run out as Argentina entered the 1930s, a decade of global crises and increased protectionism. Chapter 2. Half-hearted industrialization. This graph again shows the performance of Argentina's economy versus that of the British economy for the period of 1930 to 1976. This is important because while during this period Argentina's economy kept growing, its relative economic power was already declining, especially if we compare it to ex-British colonies like Canada and Australia. At first, Argentina's decline was simply a consequence of globalization going into reverse, meaning that it suffered heavily from the collapse of its agricultural exports due to increased protectionism in Britain, while Canada and Australia got a special deal from Britain as ex-colonies. Just as today in the 1930s, protectionism was the latest global trend. For industrialized countries like the UK and US, it was a response to the global depression, which made voters pretty upset to say the least, compelling populists to fight other countries with tariffs for a bigger slice of the economic pie. Economists generally consider this wasteful, as higher tariffs by one country tends to lead to trade wars where everyone loses. However, for non-industrialized nations like Australia and Argentina, protectionism is often considered good practice as it may help them to industrialize. US founding father Alexander Hamilton called these types of policies infant industry protection policies, and he successfully used tariffs to protect developing American industries from established British ones. During this decade, it was not just Argentina, but also Australia and many more developed nations that tried to do this protectionism as well. So why did infant industry protection fail in Argentina while it was much more successful in countries like Australia? In my research, I could find two main reasons, and both have to do with Argentina's sky-high level of inequality, where oligarchs are massively influential in politics. These oligarchs tend to get their wealth either from Argentina's fertile lands, thus profiting from free trade, or from its emerging industry, thus profiting from protectionism. In highly unequal societies where money rules politics, politics tend to be much more volatile, as moneyed interests can bribe the army to take over the government. Indeed, if we look at this graph, we can see that Argentina was rocked by several violent coups during this era, meaning that tariffs or other privileges were sometimes abruptly revoked or changed. This is a problem because it's very difficult to build lasting industries in these circumstances. However, in the end, Argentina's industrial oligarchs mostly dominated this period, meaning that the country saw a rise in industry and, sadly, a decline in agricultural production. However, this brings us to the second problem with Argentina's infant industry protection, which is corruption. You see, if done well, industries are temporarily protected from outside competition while furiously competing inside the country. However, in Argentina, that never happened, as industry bosses convinced the government to protect them from all competition.
Ahí está un poco el problema, ¿no? Ahí está un poco el problema de por qué el proteccionismo no funciona en Argentina, ¿no? ¿Qué es eso? O sea, los aranceles son para proteger a la industria argentina o a la industria local de industrias extranjeras, ¿no? Y de que el trabajo quede en tu país, pero si vos los protegés de afuera y aparte le generás monopolios en donde solamente 2 o 3 tipos manejan ciertos mercados, no hay innovación tecnológica, no hay crecimiento de esa manera. Entonces, así no funciona, solamente es un poco lo que dice ahí, la elite hace guita cuando los números del campo son mejores y hace guita cuando los proteges del extranjero y del interno, ¿no?
Never became very productive. So, where infant industry protection worked in the US, Canada, and then later in Australia, it failed in Argentina because it was not properly implemented. This meant that in the 1970s,
Eso es un poco, por eso me gustaba este video, porque es un poco lo que les digo siempre. No es el problema el libre mercado o el proteccionismo. El problema está cuando se hace mal y cuando no se hace pensando en qué le conviene más al país, ¿no? En lo que tiene que ver con la coyuntura, el momento, la demografía que tenés y la logística y todo. Que es un poco la discusión de que siempre tenemos acá, ¿no? No está mal que tengas partes con el tema del libre mercado, pero no puede ser a costa de toda tu producción local o de perder todo un montón de trabajo argentino, porque te genera otros problemas, ¿no? Tiene que haber un equilibrio de cómo hacer las cosas para que funcione.
In an era of global economic turmoil, Argentina found itself not competitive enough to earn enough foreign exchange to support the value of its currency, which promptly collapsed, leading to inflation and a loss of economic activity and tax revenue for the government. However, different than before, this interventionist government had developed a tendency to create money to offset that decline in taxes, increasing inflation to almost 5,000% per year. The resulting discontent among the public gave rise to yet another coup, where a military dictatorship installed a wealthy, free market-loving rancher as its new economy minister, with a mission to bring free market economics back to Argentina.
To switch the organization of the economy from a top-down to a bottom-up performance.
We must go through a very bitter period.
Trained at the University of Chicago.
In a normal market system that works fairly easily.
3. A disastrous free market experiment. The late 1970s marked a global economic revolution. Protectionism and state intervention was out and free market economics was in. For developing economies like Argentina, and in a more extreme case, China, free market economics emphasized that to grow countries needed to control inflation by moderating government spending and then to remove most restrictions on trade like tariffs as well as those on money flowing across borders for investment. This could potentially give developing countries a shortcut to develop through foreign direct investment, FDI for short. Using FDI rather than developing homegrown industries, developing countries could, in theory at least, convince foreign manufacturers to build factories in their countries from where they could export to the West, which was now committed to free trade. In 1976, Argentina looked perfectly positioned to dominate this model as the military junta installed a well-connected, free market-loving economist and wealthy businessman José Alfredo Martínez de Hoz as economy minister. Mr. de Hoz then installed bright Argentinians educated at the University of Chicago in key posts. For example, he installed Adolfo Diaz, who was a pupil of Milton Friedman himself, as head of the central bank. However, ironically, it was not Argentina, but rather communist China that would successfully attract FDI to transform its economy. Meanwhile, Argentina did succeed in attracting foreign capital, but it was mostly of the speculative kind.
Vos fijate en esta época, ¿no? Con Martínez de Hoz, que acá esto es interesante lo que dice el chabón. En ese momento, China también tenía una política como de libre mercado. Y terminó yendo la inversión productiva a China y a la Argentina vino la especulativa, como siempre, ¿no?
So what did China do differently than Argentina? 3 things. First, while China's political institutions were firmly captured by elites, these were much more stable than those in Argentina, where it was difficult for foreign firms to believe that reforms would not be quickly reversed. Indeed, in the 1980s, after a brutal depression, quite a few trade restrictions were reintroduced, and while de Hoz brought inflation under control by creating a depression, it soon again spiraled out of control as the next government tried to spend itself out of that depression. Such unpredictability is not great if you're trying to build factories worth millions of dollars in a country. However, that does raise the question, why did Argentina's economy go through this brutal recession in the first place, while China did not? This brings us to the second major difference between the free market reforms of China and Argentina, which is that Argentina did it suddenly through shock therapy, that's what it's called, rather than doing it gradually through free trade zones as they did in China. The consequence of shock therapy was not just that it created hardship, leaving Argentina's ruling elite vulnerable, causing political instability. The consequence in Argentina was also that it produced economic instability. That is, by opening up quickly, Argentina's inefficient industries were quickly demolished. But that also destroyed a valuable source of tax and foreign exchange revenue, thereby causing inflation and the reintroduction of tariffs, making Argentina less attractive again for foreign firms. This contributed to free marketeer Menem then instituting a fixed exchange rate to the US dollar in the early 1990s. And to maintain it, he heavily restricted government spending, thereby creating stability and reducing inflation. However, because inflation was still higher than in the United States,
No,
the
y
fixed
vos fijate que es un poco el desafío del gobierno de Milei, ¿no? Que otra vez Argentina pasa de tener un proteccionismo bobo, ¿no? Que no genera la competencia interna y termina generando, digamos, inflación y demás, por un libre mercado, ¿no? Y vamos a ver si volvemos a hacer el mismo error de abrir de golpe todo, que destruye empresas argentinas, que pierde, ¿no? Perdés ingresos fiscales, perdés trabajo y te genera otros problemas y vuelve a explotar todo por los aires, o esta vez tiene más que ver con lo que está pasando en el mundo y se aprovecha para la Argentina, ¿no? Veremos qué sucede, pero esperemos no caer otra vez en las soluciones rápidas que lo único que atraen son inversiones especulativas para venir a hacer un mango en poco tiempo.
exchange rate essentially meant that Argentina became relatively more expensive over time and therefore a less attractive destination for foreign direct investment. In contrast, China actively kept its exchange rate low in this period. So given that China was more politically and economically stable and remained much cheaper thanks to undervaluing its exchange rate, it should come as no surprise that Argentina failed to attract much FDI. This left Argentina with a demolished industrial base and without a new foreign one to replace it. And it forever increased unemployment and inequality in the country. So while China's government made it attractive for foreign investments that benefited the country in the long term, liberalized Argentina was stuck with speculative investment flows, which made Argentinians feel temporarily rich from time to time, but given that such speculative investments can leave at any time, it once again left Argentina open to a global crisis, which is exactly what happened in 1998, when the Russian and Brazilian crises caused foreign capital to quickly flee Argentina, setting the stage for even more political drama. Chapter 4. Make up your mind, Argentina. In the early 2000s, the world was still convinced about free market economics.
Nahuel dice, ¿cómo romper la bola con las empresas argentinas? Y guachín, son las únicas que dan laburo argentino. Si querés, digamos, no sé. Y así ven una empresa con capital extranjero y la ponga en Argentina, sí, es Argentina. Digamos, si vos no querés un país donde haya empresas, al final no entiendo qué quieren. Quieren un país con empresas privadas, quieren vivir todo del Estado. No se entiende nada. O sea, digamos, no hay comentario más estúpido que leí hoy que cómo romper la bola con las empresas argentinas. No sé quién te va a contratar y te va a dar laburo a vos, a tu familia y los argentinos, si no son empresas que están radicadas en Argentina, ¿no? Si tenés la suerte de laburar para Europa por internet, hacelo. No creo que haya mucho laburo para todos los argentinos así. José Santillán dice, ¿y qué inversión va a llegar con Argentina con todos estos políticos? Es una manga de imperio todo el tiempo, ¿qué confianza damos con estos que votó en toda su favor y conveniencia? Y bueno, el tema es, más que los políticos, es que los argentinos votemos consistentemente hacia un lugar. Y no va a pasar si seguimos siempre fomentando la grieta de uno al otro lado, ¿no? Porque también la grieta la compramos nosotros. Nosotros elegimos volvernos loquitos con Trump o volvernos loquitos contra Cristina, ¿no? Como si todo dependiera de nuestra vida de ellos y no tendría más que ver también con lo que uno hace día a día. Pero vamos a seguir siempre igual, porque vamos a estar peleando. Apenas fracasa uno, le va mal a uno, vamos a volver a lo anterior. Por eso digo que necesitamos que se construyan nuevos líderes peronistas y demás, o radicales o lo que sea, pero que haya nuevos liderazgos más técnicos que sepan un poquito más de historia, de economía y de lo que hay que hacer en cada sector para que la Argentina crezca de vuelta, ¿no?
However, after experiencing a 5-year-long crisis well before the West would have its own crisis in 2007, Argentina was no longer sure the free market economics of Menem was the way forward. So Argentina went back to protectionism under the Kirchner political dynasty. Their protectionist state interventionist program reinvigorated the economy, but it ended with ever-increasing inflation. Then the Argentinians voted for a free market reformer, Macri, who opened the country up to the world again, cut spending, brought back foreign money, but ultimately failed to convince foreign investors to stay for the long term, meaning this term yet again ended with a recession and increased inflation. Argentina then returned to the Kirchner dynasty, which reintroduced protectionism, grew the economy, but at the cost of ever-increasing inflation. This then provided an opening for Argentina's most radical free marketeer to date, Javier Milei, who has promised to save Argentina by once again taking it back on the path of free market fundamentalism. But can he do it? Well, to answer that question, I think we need to dive a bit deeper into the patterns that we have so far observed. First of all, I want to stress that Argentina is not the only country in the world that regressed from developed to developing economy. As we've seen, Argentina was never a properly industrialized economy like Canada, Australia, or the US. It was always agrarian. It just got lucky for a couple of decades when the combination of free trade and undeveloped fertile grasslands made some Argentinians fabulously wealthy indeed. After that era, Argentina tried protectionism and free market fundamentalism many times. And yet, where other countries succeeded in each of these approaches, Argentina failed time and time again. But why did Argentina fail at both protectionism and free market economics? According to Nobel Prize-winning economists Acemoglu, Johnson and Robinson, countries get rich not because of their favorable geography that Argentina has, not because of their culture, but rather because they have inherited the right political and economic institutions. To explain exactly how this works, they have come up with the following framework. Let's start with political power, which helps certain groups in society take control of the political institutions, like the government. According to Acemoglu and his colleagues, different types of colonization can explain a lot of patterns that we see today. Specifically, in most Latin American countries, Spanish settlers encountered rich civilizations which, after conquering them, they then sought to dominate through oppressive institutions. These oppressive political institutions created economic institutions like big state-owned banks, laws that permitted slavery, or a corrupt police force that prioritized protecting the wealth of the land-owning Spanish-descended elite. On the other hand, in British settler colonies like the US, Canada and Australia, the native population was almost completely wiped out. Therefore, they did not need to be economically dominated, which meant their inhabitants started on a more equal footing. Therefore, they created more inclusive political institutions, and then these in turn created more inclusive political institutions such as labor protection laws, laws that permitted hundreds of small banks to emerge, and courts that protected the property rights of everyone, not just those that were already wealthy. In this framework, inclusive economic institutions allow for faster economic growth because they allow for what famous Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter called
Bueno, y hasta acá llegamos.